What if the delay that annoyed you most in your life was exactly what God used to save you? Have you ever really stopped to think about that? How many times have you complained about something that didn't happen on your timeline without imagining that, at that very moment, an invisible deliverance was being prepared? Sometimes what seems like loss, frustration, or injustice can actually be a silent protection. And that's what we need to talk about today. Perhaps you're watching this video right now because something inside you feels that this message isn't a coincidence. Maybe you've experienced an inexplicable delay, a door that closed without warning, a plan that simply didn't work out, and to this day you don't understand why. But what if I told you that, behind this apparent chaos, there was a greater purpose? A divine care that you couldn't see at that moment? Have you ever been through this? Today I'm going to tell you a true story, one of those that sends shivers down your spine, where a simple delay changed everything. A delay that seemed insignificant, almost trivial, but that prevented a tragedy and awakened 3 lives to God. It's not a distant story, nor something impossible to happen. On the contrary, it's the kind of situation that could have happened to any of us. And perhaps, as you listen, you'll realize that something very similar has already happened in your own life. There is a kind of deliverance that doesn't come with noise, spectacular signs in the sky, or clear warnings. It happens in silence. Unexpected delays, changes of course, last-minute decisions, strange feelings we can't explain. Often, we ignore these signs because we are caught up in the rush, the anxiety, the desire to control everything. But God doesn't work according to our clock. He acts in perfect timing, even when it disconcerts us. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might deeply surprise you. This story isn't just about an accident avoided or a tragedy prevented. It reveals something much deeper, how God uses ordinary situations to touch hearts, transform destinies, and call people back to Him. And perhaps you'll begin to understand why certain delays happened exactly when you most wanted everything to go smoothly. How many times have you asked yourself, why me? Why on that particular day? Why at that time? Why did everything go wrong? The truth is, we're not always ready to understand in the moment. Only later, when we look back, do we realize that the delay, which seemed like a problem, was a blessing in disguise. Prophetic, silent, precise blessing. And these true stories abound, many of them never told, many of them lived by ordinary people like you and me. As you listen, perhaps your mind will begin to revisit forgotten memories. That missed bus, that canceled meeting, that postponed trip, that strange feeling that made you change your mind at the last second. None of this happens without reason. God speaks in subtle ways, and delays are often one of the clearest, yet most difficult ways to hear that gentle voice. What you are about to discover is not just a thrilling narrative. It is an invitation to reflection, a call to see beyond frustration and perceive the divine care hidden in the details. Because sometimes, deliverance doesn't come to impress us, it comes to preserve us. And the story you are about to hear begins exactly like that, with a delay that seemed insignificant, but that changed everything. And as you listen to all this, perhaps something inside you is starting to stir. Maybe this story is already touching on memories you never connected with before. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It could be a delay you didn't understand, a frustration that makes more sense now, or even a strange feeling that saved you from something you never even saw. When you share, you're not just speaking for yourself, you could be the answer someone needed to read today. If at any point during this video you felt your heart tighten, get goosebumps, or simply stop to reflect, please also consider leaving a like. This may seem simple, but it greatly helps this content reach more people who are experiencing exactly this kind of moment right now. Each like is like saying, this message needs to continue being spread, and that makes all the difference. And if you feel that this type of content resonates with your faith, your story, and what God has done or will do in your life, subscribe to the channel. Not out of obligation, but as someone who decides to walk alongside Him. Here, each video is designed to strengthen, awaken, and remind you that you are not alone, even when everything seems too quiet. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. It's a community that forms not through numbers, but through stories, experiences, and testimonies that intersect. And perhaps, without realizing it, your interaction helps this video reach someone who is experiencing a setback right now, without understanding why. So stay with me, because this story still holds details that will shed light on everything. What happened after that delay changed lives, and what comes next may bring answers you didn't even know you were looking for. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because before any delay, before any silent deliverance, there's always a context that seems absolutely ordinary. That's what makes it all the more impactful. The day begins like any other. People in a hurry, appointments scheduled, messages arriving on the cell phone, the mind occupied with tasks, decisions, responsibilities. Nothing out of the ordinary. The routine follows automatically, as it does on most days of our lives. We wake up, get ready, leave home believing we have control over the route, over the time, over what will happen in the next few hours. And that's precisely where the connection lies. Because we're not talking about a special day, nor an extraordinary scenario. We're talking about an ordinary day, one of those that go unnoticed. One of those days when nobody wakes up thinking that something could completely change the course of their journey. There were important commitments, schedules to keep, expectations set, perhaps a crucial meeting, a planned trip, a date that couldn't be delayed. Everything seemed aligned. The mindset was to move forward, resolve what needed to be resolved, and return home as usual. When life is like this, organized in our eyes, we don't question much. We don't stop to reflect. We don't pay attention to the details. It's as if the mind is focused only on the destination, never on the journey. And at this point, most of us recognize ourselves. How many times have you lived days like this, where everything seemed too normal to raise any alarm? The hidden truth is that, often, it is precisely in this scenario of normality that things begin to move behind the scenes without us realizing it. Nothing indicated that this day would be different. No obvious signs. No clear warnings. No sense of danger. On the contrary, it was an ordinary day, one of those that repeat themselves so many times that we don't even remember them afterward. But little by little, almost imperceptibly, something began to get out of control. Small deviations, minor details, a delay that arises without explanation, a seemingly silly obstacle, something that breaks the rhythm and generates irritation. The feeling that time is slipping through our fingers. And it's interesting how our first reaction is almost never one of reflection, but of discomfort. We get irritated, we question, we complain, we become impatient, because at that moment the delay seems like just a problem. It seems like a loss. It seems like carelessness. It seems like something went wrong. The mind goes into conflict trying to understand why, on that particular day, at that time, something had to go off plan. And the more we try to force control, the more uncomfortable everything becomes. This is the point where many decisions are made on impulse. Small decisions, but ones that carry impact. Choosing to wait or not, changing course, canceling or persisting, going back or continuing anyway. These are choices that seem simple, but are part of a much larger journey. And, without realizing it, life begins to reorganize itself around these decisions. Not chaotically, but precisely, as if something were being adjusted behind the scenes, outside our field of vision. There's a silent pattern in these moments. When something starts to get out of control, we believe we're losing control of the situation, when in reality we may be being protected from something we can't even imagine. This is a type of transformation that doesn't happen externally, but internally. The mindset begins to be challenged. The rush is interrupted. Confidence in one's own planning is tested. And, even without understanding it, the person is no longer in exactly the same emotional place as minutes ago. It is in this scenario that the real impact begins to take shape. Not the visible impact, but the one that works silently, aligning circumstances, delaying steps, redesigning trajectories. And all this happens while life seems merely delayed. Nothing extraordinary in human eyes. Just a sequence of common events that, together, begin to build something much bigger than it appears. Perhaps you recognize this pattern in your own story. That time when everything was planned, but something simply didn't cooperate. That day when you felt you were wasting time, without knowing that you might be gaining something much more valuable. These moments are part of a journey that only reveals meaning when we look more deeply. When we understand that not everything that delays hinders, and not everything that flows protects. And it is precisely here that this story gains new weight, because when we understand the context before the delay, we begin to realize that nothing was out of place. Everything was happening within a purpose that had not yet been revealed. The revelations don't come immediately. They are built up, and every seemingly ordinary detail carries a meaning that only becomes apparent when the sequence begins to unfold. Comment below, "This makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it is precisely here that the story ceases to be merely about identification and begins to become a rupture. The delay appears without warning, without logical explanation, almost like a detail too irritating to be ignored. The traffic, which always flows at that time, simply stops. A line that doesn't move, a traffic light that seems eternal. People looking at their watches, taking deep breaths, feeling the unease growing inside. Nothing makes sense. There was no visible accident, no prior warning, just a silent blockage in the road. Or the problem arises in another way. A strange noise in the car. Something that never caused a problem before suddenly fails on that particular day. A flat tire, a warning light on the dashboard, an engine that doesn't respond as it should. Small setbacks that seem insignificant when viewed in isolation, but which, together, delay precious minutes. Minutes that, at that moment, seem like a waste. The mind is in conflict, patience dwindles. The feeling is of being prevented from moving forward. There are also those even more disconcerting delays, when nothing external seems to justify them. The person simply can't leave on time. Something distracts them, something holds them back, something makes them lose track of time. An unexpected call, a forgotten detail, a previous commitment that extends beyond what was planned. All of this creates an emotional discomfort that is difficult to explain, because there is no clear culprit. Just the feeling that time is slipping through their fingers. It is at this point that the delay ceases to be merely an inconvenience and transforms into a test of mindset. The person begins to question decisions, choices, priorities. Why is this happening now? Why me? Irritation mixes with anxiety, and the desire is to regain control at any cost. To move forward, to accelerate, to make up for lost time. But life, curiously, doesn't allow it. There seems to be an invisible force holding back each step. The delay seems small, but it was about to change everything. Only nobody knew it yet. For those experiencing that moment, it was just another setback on an ordinary day. Nothing indicated that the delay was repositioning people, altering routes, changing the exact alignment of time and space. Behind the scenes, something bigger was beginning to align, while on the surface only frustration existed. This is the most delicate point in the journey, because it's here that many give up on reflecting. Most just complain and move on with their lives. But when we look more deeply, we realize that the delay carries a hidden truth. It breaks the illusion of control. It forces us to stop, even if only for a few minutes. And in that pause, even if involuntary, decisions are avoided, paths are altered, and encounters fail to happen. The emotional impact of this moment doesn't come with immediate force. It's subtle, a persistent discomfort, a strange feeling that something isn't fitting together as it should. And the more the person tries to ignore it, the more the delay imposes itself, as if a limit were being drawn, an invisible boundary between what would happen and what can no longer happen. It's interesting to notice how these delays never occur at neutral moments. They always appear when something important is at stake. A crucial commitment, a trip, a choice that seems certain. Life is in motion and suddenly, it pauses, not by chance but out of necessity. Even if that necessity only becomes clear much later, when the revelations begin to emerge. At this stage of the story, no one imagines deliverance. No one thinks of protection. Everything just seems too inconvenient. But it is precisely there that the breaking point is established. The delay breaks the predicted timeline and creates a new possibility, a new configuration of events. The transformation is not immediate, but the scenario is no longer the same. Something has been interrupted. Something has been diverted. And while the person is still trying to understand why that delay happened without knowing it, they are no longer where they would be if everything had gone right. This change of position, still invisible, carries an enormous weight. Because sometimes it's not about arriving late. It's about not arriving at a place that should never have been reached. This moment carries a silent tension. Nothing has exploded. Nothing has happened yet. But the unease lingers in the air, as if reality were holding its breath. And it is from this inexplicable delay that the story begins to reveal its deepest layer, the one that only makes sense when subsequent events begin to fall into place. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is where the story reaches a point that no one was prepared to face. The delay was still being seen as just an inconvenience when, without warning, reality showed what was happening far away. While those people were still stuck in traffic, dealing with the mechanical problem, or simply trying to understand why they couldn't leave on time, something serious was happening exactly on the route they should have taken. It wasn't a small thing. It wasn't a minor scare. It was a real tragedy. A violent, sudden accident, the kind that changes everything in seconds. Sirens, confusion, destruction. A scene no one imagines when leaving home on an ordinary day. The kind of event that interrupts lives, plans, stories. People injured, others who didn't have time to react. An impact so strong that it paralyzed the region and forever marked those who witnessed it. And the most terrifying thing is realizing that that was the exact place where they would have been if the delay hadn't happened. The time was right, the route was the same, the destination was there. Everything indicated that they would have been there at the exact moment of the tragedy. But they weren't. By minutes, by details, by something that, hours before, seemed like just an annoying problem. When this information arrives, it doesn't come calmly. It comes as a shock, a heavy silence, a chill that runs through the entire body. The mind tries to retrace the route, recalculate the time, imagine scenarios. What if we had left on time? What if the traffic had been normal? What if nothing had gone wrong? These questions don't find easy answers because they all lead to the same place. They would be in the midst of destruction. If they had arrived on time, they wouldn't be alive to tell the story. This statement is not an exaggeration. It's a fact. It's the stark truth that emerges when the facts align. The delay, which previously seemed like an obstacle, reveals itself as an invisible line between life and death, a silent dividing line that completely changed the course of that journey. The emotional impact of that moment is difficult to describe. It's not just relief, it's something deeper, a mixture of fear, gratitude, confusion, and reverence. Because when it all clicks, your mindset changes. Your perception of life changes. Decisions begin to be revisited through a different lens. What seemed like a setback starts to be seen as protection. What seemed like a lack of control begins to reveal a hidden truth about care, direction, and purpose. It is at this point that many understand that they were not only being spared physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. The transformation happens from within. The heart slows down. The pride of thinking you control everything crumbles. The journey takes on a different meaning. It's no longer about arriving quickly, meeting deadlines, or following plans to the letter. It's about being exactly where you should be, even when that goes against logic. Behind the scenes, something much bigger had been orchestrated. A precise alignment of time, space, and circumstances. Nothing was random. The delay wasn't a mistake. It was a silent intervention. And realizing this completely changes how one looks at life's events. The rush loses its power. Anxiety diminishes. A profound respect emerges for details that were previously ignored. What's most striking is that this tragedy happened without them. The destruction was real, the pain was real, but it didn't reach them. They remained outside the impact, separated by minutes that seemed insignificant. And that minimal distance was enough to preserve lives, stories, entire futures. Sometimes that's exactly how deliverance manifests itself. Not by preventing tragedy from existing, but by preventing it from reaching us. This moment becomes a turning point, a point of no return in the way one perceives their own history. The person never again sees delays in the same way, never again treats obstacles as mere problems. Because now there is awareness, there is memory, there is the certainty that not everything that delays harms, and not everything that flows protects. And when this understanding begins to take shape, something even deeper prepares to surface. Because deliverance doesn't end with the avoided event. It continues in the revelations that emerge afterward, in the internal unfoldings, in the changes of course that keep happening even after the initial shock. The story hasn't finished unfolding yet. Comment below, "This makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after the shock, after the almost unbelievable relief of realizing that the tragedy happened without them, something begins to change inside. It's not immediate, it's not noisy, it's not an explosion of words. Most of the time, what comes first is silence. A different kind of silence, heavy and, at the same time, revealing. People look at each other without knowing exactly what to say. The body still reacts, the hands tremble slightly, the breathing takes time to return to normal. It's as if the soul is trying to reach what the mind cannot yet explain. Some cry without quite understanding why. It's not just fear, nor just relief. It's the belated realization that something very serious was avoided. Others remain quiet, staring into nothingness, mentally retracing every detail of that day, every decision, every lost minute that now takes on a new meaning. At that moment, there is no hurry. The urgency that existed before disappears. Everything slows down. The inner journey begins. That's where the recognition comes from. Not forced, not taught, simply perceived. The feeling that it wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't just a statistical fluke. There's something different when the mind begins to accept that there was an intervention beyond human control. Something that acted behind the scenes, adjusting time, space, and circumstances with a precision impossible to ignore. And even those who never considered themselves spiritual feel this impact deeply. Our mindset changes because life shifts within us. What once seemed like a priority loses its power. What was ignored begins to be observed more closely. Small signs, details, and sensations that were previously dismissed now gain importance. The hidden truth begins to emerge. Not every deliverance comes with noise. Sometimes, God saves us silently, through a delay. This understanding doesn't come as a heavy religious discourse, nor as an obligation of faith. It comes as a personal revelation, as something that makes sense deep within. God is never late. He protects. And protecting doesn't always mean preventing something from happening in the world. Often, it simply means taking us out of the wrong place at the exact right time. This carries a spiritual authority that doesn't need to be proclaimed, only lived. Spiritual awakening happens precisely there, in that space between what could have been and what was avoided. The person realizes they were on the verge of something irreversible and didn't know it. That life went on too normally until it was interrupted by a delay that seemed too small to matter. And now, looking back, everything falls into place in a way that leaves no doubt. The decisions made that day, even the simplest ones, were fundamental. This awakening also brings humility, the awareness that we don't control everything, that there are paths we don't see, that the human journey is limited, but not without support. Behind the scenes, something greater is at work. And when this realization dawns on us, the way we relate to time changes. Anxiety diminishes. Haste loses its authority. A deeper trust emerges, not in the immediate result, but in the process. Many describe this moment as a turning point, not because life becomes perfect afterward, but because perception is never the same again. The person begins to interpret delays, pauses, and changes of course with more care. Not with fear, but with discernment. Not every delay is a blessing in disguise, but every blessing in disguise carries a purpose. And this distinction begins to be felt, not just understood. There is also a clear sense of gratitude that settles in. Not that superficial gratitude, but a silent reverence for life itself. An understanding that being here, breathing, continuing the journey, is not something guaranteed. It is a gift, and when this awareness is established, something new begins to be built from within. A more mature faith, a more conscious trust, a deeper relationship with the invisible. And this awakening doesn't just happen for a specific moment. It extends. It influences future decisions. It shapes reactions to new delays, new obstacles, new unexpected pauses. The person begins to realize that perhaps not everything needs to be understood immediately. Some revelations only come with time. Others remain hidden, supporting choices yet to come. Because deliverance wasn't just about escaping tragedy. It was about awakening to a greater reality, where silence also speaks, where delay also guides, and where protection doesn't always come in the way we expect. And it is precisely from this awakening that other layers of the story begin to reveal themselves, opening space for even deeper understandings of purpose, direction, and care. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after everything that has been revealed so far, the story ceases to be just about those people and begins to directly touch on your own journey. On some level, this experience resonates with the listener because it speaks to something we have all experienced. Delays that bother us, pauses that frustrate us, changes of course that seem unfair at the moment they happen. And the question that arises, almost inevitably, is simple and disconcerting at the same time. How many delays in your life have you complained about without realizing they were blessings in disguise? This question isn't meant to accuse, but to awaken, because most of us have been taught to see delay as failure, as loss, as something that needs to be corrected quickly. We live in a mindset that values speed, control, efficiency. The faster, the better. The more predictable, the safer. But real life rarely works that way. And when we look more honestly at our own history, we begin to realize how many times something didn't go as planned, and yet it was exactly what kept us going. Perhaps you're now remembering situations you never connected with in this way. A relationship that didn't progress. A job that didn't work out. A canceled trip. A decision that had to be postponed against your will. At the time, everything seemed like a delay. Everything seemed like frustration. But with time, some of these situations revealed a different impact. You escaped greater pain. You avoided paths that would have hurt you. You were repositioned without realizing it. This is a silent transformation that begins when we change the way we interpret what happens. It doesn't mean romanticizing problems or denying difficulties. It means understanding that there's a deeper layer at work behind the scenes of life. A logic that can't be explained solely by reason, but by discernment. And when this mindset changes, something within us relaxes. Anxiety loses its power. Haste ceases to rule. Space opens up for trust. There is also something very symbolic in the fact that you are listening to this message now. Perhaps this video didn't arrive too late for you. Perhaps it appeared exactly at a moment when you are questioning time, pauses, and detours in your own journey. None of this needs to be understood as coincidence. Sometimes, revelation doesn't come in the form of a direct answer, but of internal alignment. Something fits. Something makes sense. Something calms. When we begin to look at delays with this kind of awareness, the journey changes. Decisions are made more carefully. Reactions become less impulsive. Silence ceases to be empty and becomes a space for listening. And even when the answer doesn't come immediately, there's a different kind of trust sustaining the process. Not a naive trust, but a trust built from experience, memory, and the perception that we've been protected before, even without knowing it. This personal application isn't about passively accepting everything, but about recognizing that not every pause is negative, nor every obstacle a mistake. Some delays are adjustments, others are protection, and some are invitations to see beyond the immediate. When this becomes clear, life continues with its challenges, but the way of walking changes. The weight lessens, faith matures, vision broadens, and perhaps most importantly, it's crucial to realize that the liberation doesn't end with the avoided impact. It continues to reverberate in future choices, in more conscious attitudes, in a deeper relationship with time and purpose. The delay that once bothered you becomes remembered as a turning point, an invisible milestone that redefined the course without needing to make a sound. This story, at its core, isn't about fear. It's about care. It's not about control. It's about direction. And the more we allow ourselves to reflect on this, the more we realize that there are patterns repeating themselves in our own lives. Small pauses that saved great stories. Moments of waiting that prevented irreversible pain. Silences that spoke louder than any warning. And it is from this reflection that other understandings begin to emerge, because when we learn to trust in delays, we begin to see the journey with different eyes. There is still much to be revealed, layers that only show themselves with time, connections that continue to form. But this initial awareness already prepares the ground for everything that comes after. If this message resonated with you, comment below, I trust in God's delays. And if you've made it this far, it's because this conversation has truly resonated with you. Something along the way made sense. Something connected with your story, your time, your own delays. So, if you feel like it, leave a simple phrase in the comments. just so I know you've been with me until the end. You can write, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you until the end." Sometimes, these few words say more than we imagine. If at any point during this video you felt you weren't listening by chance, please leave a like. Not as an automatic gesture, but as someone who acknowledges this silent exchange that happened here. This helps the content continue reaching people who need exactly this kind of reflection. If this type of message strengthens you, brings you clarity, and helps you see life with more discernment, it's worth subscribing to the channel. That way, you can continue to follow stories, reflections, and testimonies that speak of deliverance, purpose, and direction, without haste, without noise, but with depth. There's a video over here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this conversation. Click on it and continue with me there. The journey continues, and perhaps the next message will also have something in store.